Hi everyone, I'm Manila. I'm a non-executive director at Doxtribute, which is one of our fabulous fintechs that will be presenting at the showcase later on today. And until quite recently was the Chief Information Officer at Newcastle Building Society and Strategic Solutions, which is a long-term supporter of FinTech North.
Steve Kevin, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of FinPact. We'll go into the genesis of FinPact shortly. I think it's going to be one of the questions that we kick off with anyway. So I'll leave it at that and explain a little bit more as we go along.
Thanks, Steve. So I've got the pleasure of interviewing Steve in front of you all this afternoon. We've heard FinPact mentioned and referenced quite a few times today, and some common threads that have come through, which I'm sure Steve will touch on into some of the questions that I'm going to ask. For those of you that attended last year's conference, you would have heard Steve launch FinPact, the concept and what his initial aims and objectives were. But for the next sort of 15, 20 minutes or so, we're going to have a discussion about what he's been up to for the last year, how things have progressed, and what the plans are. Hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for some Q&A as well. So Steve, remind us, what were the circumstances surrounding the formation of FinPact? What led to it?
Yes, I think it's already been mentioned a few times today. The Khalifa report was the starting point, and that was the genesis for Whitecap producing a report commissioned by the broad Northeast FinTech community to look at a particular FinTech strategy for the Northeast in particular. And I'd returned to the Northeast after many, many years away, was looking to occupy my time. I thought that works for me, getting involved in FinTech. I've got a financial services background for the last 40 years. And so it was a great opportunity to get involved. Got involved in some of the early work streams around that strategy piece. And I think reasonably quickly, we realized that it was trying to be delivered through some very keen volunteers, but didn't have a great structure around it. And when we looked around at other organizations or other ways in which these things were being delivered nationally and internationally, it was quite clear you needed some sort of dedicated delivery vehicle for it. So we looked at the likes of FinTech Scotland, and I've got to say, I've got to give personal thanks to Stephen Ingledew and the team at FinTech Scotland, who've been hugely supportive and helpful to us in setting FinPact up and setting us off on our journey. And it was quite pleasing to see Stephen's presentation this morning, because it's like he's been in our heads for the last 6 months, knowing which direction and things that we're trying to do. So hopefully it demonstrates that at least we're going down the right track. So yeah, it was about giving some form and some substance to bring the strategy into play, and that's where we created FinPact. It's a community investment company, so it's a not-for-profit. We're funded by the industry and local authorities, although we'll be looking to expand that reach, if you like, as we develop our plans for the next 12 months as well. So more on that to follow.
And what you've described there will appeal to everybody in this audience, because you're here if you've got an interest, particularly in the Northeast and what we're doing. So from that ideation stage and the drivers coming out of the Khalifa report and so on, and taking the learns from FinTech Scotland and whatnot, how did you then shape the strategy and start to take that forward? So
as you can imagine, I don't know if you're familiar with the Northeast strategy report, but I think it's still, I'm right to say, on the Whitecap website, so it's accessible from there, and I would recommend anyone that hasn't read it to have a read of it. And from that, you'll see that there are a number of recommendations and areas that if you're going to build a world-class ecosystem for the FinTech in the Northeast, there is work to be done. There's some absolutely fantastic work to be done. There's some that is being done, sorry. There are some gaps, and there's some greater coordination that can take place. So we realized, being a very thin organization, we couldn't do everything at once. So we picked on 3 areas in particular that we said, right, over the next 12 months leading up to today, sort of, let's focus on those. Let's almost do a proof of concept for ourselves as much as anything, but to also prove to the industry and the ecosystem, the broader ecosystem, as to what we could do. So we focused on the talent pool and skills. And it was, we are part of the steering committee that Daniel was talking about earlier. That's focused very much on the older age group, if you like, or those looking to get into the FinTech careers now. We started at the other end of schools and inspiring children and supporting children to look at ways, or having an understanding as to how they might get a career in FinTech. And when we started looking at that, we found there was some extraordinarily interesting work going on, but a lot of it was not joined up. So what we've created is this thing called FinTech Futures. And it's basically stitching together all of the things that we've found that are going on in the Northeast into almost a single proposition. And one of the main reasons we've done that is that the industry's been telling us they're passionate about schools, about the skills gap, about inspiring children to follow careers in the FinTech and digital sector. But they didn't know how to do that. So I think as we launch FinTech Futures over the coming weeks, it'll give a tool to companies that they can look at and say, right, I now understand how I can play a part. And that part might be, if your local school isn't doing computer science as part of the curriculum at the moment, we've got a route through the Computing Hub for Schools that can deliver computer science into a primary school. We'll support the teachers, we'll train the teachers, we'll do CPD for the teachers. We've then added in access to reconditioned laptops. So you get the likes of Nissan and Newcastle Building Society of old, as they recondition their laptop estate, that can be donated into the schools as well. One problem we're trying to solve at the minute is around digital access. So if these children have got the laptop or the iPad at home or tablet at home, how do they may not have that digital access. So how do we put that in place? So that's about companies helping to put the infrastructure in place, if you like. And then as part of the computer science curriculum, we're building, if you like, learning modules to support the curriculum and the objectives of the curriculum that basically are applied learning, but it has a finance aspect to it. And within that, we're also introducing financial education for kids, because we think that's the absolute starting point, is that if you can help children understand, have a financial education, it brings the whole FinTech bit to life anyway. So we're working with a great charity called Red Start Educate. I know you've had some involvement with them, Manila, who are working with local schools in the Northeast, putting financial education into place as well. So there's a whole range of things that you look at, almost a client journey. I've come from a marketing background. So it's a client journey that says, how do you inspire children? How do you support children? And how do you take them on that journey to follow a career in FinTech? So that's
FinTech Futures. That's
FinTech Futures. That's what we're calling it as a program. Yeah.
And actually, a lot of things you just touched on there align very nicely to Kim McGuinness's vision around addressing child poverty. How do you see that weaving in?
It is. I mean, this is, we're looking at schools where they're underrepresented or underprivileged. I mentioned the financial education bit. That was happening at schools that I visited out in the West End of Newcastle. But there are other initiatives that we're building as our next 12-month program, if you like, where the impact is for some of those objectives that Kim's got around child poverty, around inclusivity, and that type of thing. It's always got a financial angle to it, but that's what we're building in there. So that was strand one of our three strands. The second one was around regional expansion and collaboration. And as FinPact, we're absolutely delighted, having worked very closely with Business Durham and Durham County Council. And Jenny Halford's here today. And you may well have seen some flyers dotted around the venue talking about the Durham FinTech Accelerator. So FinPact has now been appointed as the supplier to that. So we'll be launching that in September. So if there are any startups here today and they're looking for that support from an accelerator incubator perspective, then grab one of those flyers and put your application in, because applications are now open, and we'll be starting the program in September. So that's our second one. The third one was around innovation, and that was looking at is our innovation pipeline in the Northeast truly aligned? And what I mean by that is, if somebody's got an idea, we've heard data a lot today. So if somebody's got an idea, have they got access to data? Have they got access to resources in the sense of the universities, and whether that's the faculty or the student bodies? How can they get into that? Is there a mentoring infrastructure that's in place to help those startups? And then the most important one we heard early on in the morning is around funding and how we bring that funding into play. So we picked up a project and identified a project which is around just digitalization of the power of attorney process, which I think, there was mention earlier around mortgages and that whole mortgage process bit being digitalized. This is just another aspect of the same sort of thing around power of attorney, because I don't know if anybody's experienced registering a power of attorney and then trying to use a power of attorney with an organization. It's pretty painful. So I think, so we got involved with Northumbria University. There was a student body that then spent time pulling a report together for us. Absolutely great report. If anybody would like to see a copy of that, please get in touch with me and I'll gladly circulate that. But that gave us a pathfinder to say, right, there is a project that we can do around power of attorney. But the other thing it sort of demonstrated to us is, just as we talked about FinTech futures, and you haven't got that stitching together of those various bits of the innovation pipeline, we know that that's one of the next projects that we need to put in place, of finding the right access or single front door into the universities, making sure there's a mentor network that's available, and then most importantly, the funding side of things and the access to data. Is clearly part of that as well. So they're the three strands that we've focused on right at the outset. As I say, we've now delivered on, we're doing the Durham Accelerator. We've got a great report on the back of power of attorney that can lead into another project or continuation of that project. And then one of the things we're most excited about, I think, is this FinTech Futures and the impact it can have on schools around that.
And if there's anybody in the audience who is particularly keen in getting involved or supporting one or more parts of it, how would they go about that?
So I think we'll, please contact me through, finpact.co.uk. So please just get in touch with me. Find me on LinkedIn, and FinPact is on LinkedIn as well. So please approach us that way. We'll be doing lots of work around the PR and just getting the story out about FinTech futures in particular that we'll be putting out there. But yeah, any of those areas that you're interested in or passionate about and would like to help support us, we are creating now an impact steering committee within FinPact. So Kev Telford, who you'll be seeing in one of the panels straight after here, is pulling the FinPact impact steering committees together. And this is a grouping of that triple helix that Stephen was talking about, of academia, the industry, and the support side of things, and local authorities, of working together to deliver these. All we can do is surface these initiatives. We can put some form to these initiatives, but it needs the community in the Northeast to sort of rally around those, grab hold of those initiatives, and then work towards the delivery, the planning of which we can help with. But yeah, we do not want to be an organisation of 100 people. We'd rather rally the community with some structured initiatives that they can deliver for the good of the Northeast, and be a facilitator to that. It's back to Stephen's thing of being a coach on the sidelines and operating from the technical area and making sure the team's playing well.
Yeah. It's a lot of great work that you've done over the last 10 months, and a clear strategy that you've outlined with 3 top priorities. What do you see as the large strategic challenges that you're facing into, and how can we support there?
I think it's, so the reason we've done these 3 initial projects is, as I said earlier, it's about proof of concept to ourselves that we can make a difference, that we can start having an impact, and I think we're doing that. We've got some real ambitions around bringing new initiatives into play, and some of those initiatives may be around accessibility and inclusion. There's a lot of there's a lot of news about the haptic shirts at Newcastle United and what was going on there. We think there are ways in which, in a similar vein, there is accessibility around cultural and sporting events that can give greater inclusivity, and there's a FinTech play or finance play within all of that. So we will be surfacing a lot of new initiatives going forward now, and hopefully with our impact steering committee, we can give them some real impetus and momentum behind those. But we also have one very big idea that we're working on at the moment. And again, kudos to FinTech Scotland and the approach they've taken with their innovation hub around RegTech. We love the idea of the North East becoming famous for a particular aspect within the FinTech sector. I'm not going to say which part of the sector or which sector it is at this stage, because it's still in planning stage. But essentially what we're working towards at the moment is pulling together a consortium, again made up of the major players, academia, the local authorities, the industry, and the support network to that, financiers, to create an innovation hub for the North East on a particular subject matter. And I think that's the one we're most excited about, because we see that where academia plays a role in producing research and deep diving and surfacing, if you like, some of the horizon view that's going on in some of these areas. So that if somebody thinks about X, they will think about the North East as the place to come and find out about that and to build their propositions in the North East from that. So that's where we're going, is just having that focus of being very good at something. So that's one of the major implementations we're doing. But then again, if you look at just the circle of what does a world-class ecosystem look like, there's lots of little things we can be doing on around place. You know, it's great that we've got the Durham Incubator and Accelerator coming through now. We'd love to see one of those with a permanent address, if you like, in Newcastle as well. So I think what we've got a regional remit, and what we'd like to do is start building consistency. So if there's a Durham Accelerator, it's the same experience as you would have if you had a Newcastle Accelerator, if you had a Sunderland Accelerator, a Darlington. I don't know if Darlington fits in, but yeah, the region. So yeah, bringing all of those things together, but it's a consistent experience that people are having right across the region. So we build some regional strength around that. So there's a number of things around that. There's lots where we're not going to reinvent the wheel. I mean, we've been talking about finance. And we heard this morning about the pathway to finance that Innovation Super Network has. So that's where, you know, when we look at what does the ecosystem, what is it made up of? It's access to finance is one of those. Well, we've got a solution to that in Pathways to Finance. We're not going to reinvent the wheel or duplicate. It's all about unearthing these things and, as I say, stitching them together where an entrepreneur, an inward investor, a new organization, a growth company knows that the ecosystem of the North East FinTech community is aligned. I think that's the bit that we can just continuously improve what we're doing. And then again, with sort of FinTech North, we're looking at the sort of international connections as well. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment with FinTech Atlanta in the States and some of the stuff that we're doing there. I think Peter Canane was talking about FinTech Singapore. And of course, you've got Newcastle University with a campus in Singapore. So there's a natural link for us to be doing work with that area as well. So lots to do.
When you said the word alignment there, I just had the vision of Steve's, everybody wearing the same T-shirt.
And I think that, you know, as I say, you know, Steve and I haven't had a conversation for a little while. So it was actually quite spooky hearing Steve's, you know, presentation, because it aligns exactly with what we're doing, and we will nick the T-shirt idea and actually have them made up, I think, Steve, so we can all wear them at the next conference.
So if we're sitting here in 12 months' time, and I'm asking you, what have you done in the last 12 months with Impact? What are the sort of top three?
I think I'd like to have seen our innovation hub come to life and flying, and we can talk about what it is. At that point, we'll talk about what it is well in advance of us getting together in a year's time. I think that's really important, because I think that gives some real momentum to the Northeast, some real identity for the Northeast in the FinTech sector. And that's working with the regions as well, that as we launch that, it's just as, we're keen to see getting involved with FinTech Scotland around some of the stuff they do, because there are companies in the Northeast that can do stuff in RegTech. So, there's no borders here. It's about how do we collaborate with each other within our own specialisms, if you like. That's important for us. We want to encourage some of that. I mean, it was interesting on the cross-border stuff. We've been working with Morgan Stanley last year because they have an inclusive innovation lab. It was predominantly based in Scotland, but we spoke to Rafiq, who's part of that with Morgan Stanley, and we actually had 4 companies who were present from the Northeast who were part of that innovation lab last year. And so I would encourage, and again we'll put this out nearer the time, I'd encourage Northeast companies to get involved in that innovation lab, because it gets you involved with Morgan Stanley, which can't be a bad thing, but it's a great innovation lab. I think it's a £250,000 award. So it's a substantial program that they've got in place. And as I say, we managed to get 4 great companies involved in that last year.
I asked you for 3. What's your other
Sorry.
2?
I think it's these initiatives. I think some meeting Kim's objectives around the child poverty is having that impact. It's back to FinTech for good. And I think if we can deliver a number of programs that have that FinTech for good objective as part of it, then I've seen that with the education, financial education for kids, the enthusiasm that goes on there. And it's quite interesting. It has an impact on the teachers. They're learning as much as the kids are learning. And I think the kids taking that back home, also it feeds into the family as well. So, I think you're making real change for life in there, in that sense. So, lots of challenging things. I do have to just acknowledge as well, within all these programs, we've had great support from some great local companies like Newcastle Building Society. In the power of attorney bit, we had Cascade very heavily involved in that. We had Settled, we're involved in that as well. So there's some, and Womble Bond Dickinson, who have always been a very, very strong supporter of FinPact. So I just need to acknowledge I've missed loads of people off, but it's been heartening to see how the industry's stepped up and got involved in these. That's
one of the points that you made earlier on as well. This is about a community, and it's a community impact.
Yeah, and I think the Northeast is as good as anywhere for having that. There is a resilience, there is an identity, and I think we have to leverage that as much as we can.
Thank you, Steve. Do we have time for some questions, Joe?
Covered it already.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks everybody for the round. So for our next segment, I'm going to welcome back one familiar face, the vendor of T-shirts from earlier on this morning, Stephen Ingledew. Stephen, if you could join us up on stage with your panel as well. And you know what, I'll get off the stage and I'll let you do the chairing because you do such a good job with it, and you can introduce your fellow panelists. So take it away from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And I'd like to invite up, we've got a five-a-side team. I'd like to invite up our five-a-side team. I think, so my role, as the team come up, is to be a cross between Fiona Bruce, Graham Norton and David Dimbleby, to say as little as possible, because the team on the pitch are going to show you the work that's going on and hopefully give you some thoughts about, actually, I want to be involved with that, or yes, I can help with that, or I've got an idea on that when it's developing the world-class FinTech cluster here in the Northeast. So here's the five-a-side team. The names are on the there, so you'll get to know them by how they're kicking the ball around, and we're going to score some goals, hopefully, from your perspective. And I'm going to go straight to a striker of the team, and that's Lucy from Newcastle. Now, Lucy, I've called you the striker because as an entrepreneurial, innovative business now here in Newcastle, you're going to be putting the ball in the back of the net.
Okay, as long as you're not expecting Alan Shearer overnight, then happy to take the challenge.
I was thinking more of Malcolm McDonald or Andy Cole as as examples, but
Happy
well,
to try to kick the ball for you, Stephen.
Lucy, just maybe just explaining to Kasia, and actually you are a global fintech,
Yes.
but with a growing base here in the Northeast. Why?
Yeah, so it's been a great experience to work with Intercash and see how they're expanding into different markets internationally. But we pride ourselves on building robust, resilient, effective technology for businesses to streamline their payments processes. And I was working out of London and had a need to move back to Newcastle because I was having my first child. And first thing that I thought was, I'd love to see what's happening on the financial space here. And I was really pleased to see that there were some organizations that were putting some exposure out there in terms of how things were developing, and just really wanted to get involved. So we set up an office space here, and I've been working for a few years now out of Newcastle, and throughout this time participating with FinTech North, we've seen some really inspiring innovations happening that we really want to get involved with and help support.
So Lucy, a great example, actually, Newcastle, the Northeast does have that magnet pool already for an international fintech. So that's great to hear from the striker. Well, any great team has an important sort of foundation of enabling from defense. It's not so much defense, but more ready to line up the attack. And in that is the role of the public sector. So Jenny, from Business Durham, I was thinking, now, the public sector does have a role to play in helping entrepreneurial businesses.
Absolutely. If you think about the public sector, you'd have this image of, council workers not really engaging, sitting in their offices, arranging bins and collections. But, as business support arm of Durham County Council, Business Durham does a huge amount. We have teams and teams of people to help generate so much activity that would contribute to the economy on that front. So if you take for example, NetPark. NetPark, as you know, is 30 minutes down the A1. It's a technology park down in Sedgefield. It'd be easy for us to just say, right, okay, let's just build a load of buildings and, just invite science people to come along and do a load of stuff. Build it and they'll come. If we stuck by that sort of mantra, I don't think, it would be where it is today, NetPark, in that, we employ, NetPark has 40 companies that employs over 700 high-value sort of jobs there, with 3 national innovation centres. We have the home of the Northeast Space Cluster there, and that hasn't come from sort of just building some buildings. We've got teams like myself who arrived at the place 15 years. I'm giving my age away now. So we're celebrating a 20th anniversary this year, and certainly, without those teams behind there applying for European funds, constructing some of the programs that make entrepreneurship and the spirit and enabling the entrepreneurs to do what they do, it will be just a set of buildings with fancy slats and lots of glass and inviting people to take up tenancy. So it is a snowball effect. It is a flywheel effect. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of money and a lot of time to actually get that flywheel moving. But once it starts moving, it generates its own economic positive benefits.
I think that's a terrific example, Jenny. Well, you created really the foundations, really, you can't be the entrepreneurs or the innovators necessarily, but you can create the environment. And I think your examples there at Net Park is a great example. There are a few others we may come back to. The other part of enabling, bringing out, you start from the back to get to score those goals is kind of really that kind of leadership behind the scenes. We heard it a bit from Steve, but maybe Kevin, I was going to, because you've been working closely with Steve and FinTech, because you're the other enabling part alongside in providing that leadership. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say, Stephen. I think when you're at the back, you need to set out a clear vision and a purpose and a mission for what glues the team together, so that you know which direction you're headed in, you know how you're going to measure that against OKRs. So you're starting big with that big vision, but coming back to small projects that Stephen talked about. So when Ed joined as chair from Atom Bank, he said, do projects, get projects under the way, the rest will follow, because you can then talk about the impact that Steve talked about, that you've actually done something.
Yeah.
Not enough, a long way to go, and some gnarly problems still to tackle, but we're on the road with momentum, as Jenny says.
And I'll come back in a moment, actually, Kevin, on some of how you can act as that funnel, particularly on investments in a moment. We'll come back to that in a moment. So we've talked about strikers, talked about working from the back. Now, the link there in the midfield, for me, there's a midfield, there's always two parts, really. You need a bit of flair to do that linkage. And I think flair, at the end of the day, comes from people. And Aidan, really, this is where I think the role that your colleges and academia as a whole is playing in providing the people for the future, provide that flair, is so key. Is that a fair description of the opportunity?
Most definitely, but what comes from what us can do as educators definitely comes from the employers, and that's generally why myself and my colleague are here today, to try and get as much from employers as possible, because what you put in is what we can put out in terms of the skills going into the FinTech industry. We've had great resources already provided by Whitecap and the support of FinPact, but we're sort of here to listen. What are the skills? We keep hearing about the skills gap. What is it that people are asking for? And what we can provide is we've got free rein to sort of create a curriculum around what's going to upskill these people wanting to move into the industry, or upskill your current staff into sort of being able to provide the jobs for the future, sort of ready and waiting for them.
And it was touched on earlier, actually, because when we think of colleges, we think of obviously people coming from that early stage of education before they go out to work, and early stage apprenticeships. But actually, I think we need to dispel that myth right now, don't we?
Most definitely. Most people would see when I walk around with a very clear T-shirt on Gateshead College, there's a bit of a misconception that we are 16 to 18-year-old education providers. Most of our learners are adult learners. They're coming to us to upskill themselves. We've got a range of adult courses and the bootcamp, which we're going to lead to in the FinTech industry. It's already sort of a tried and tested product that's been sort of rolled out from the Department of Education and other industries, and we're wanting to bring it into the FinTech industry to sort of get these skills that people are crying out for. So it may be sort of people who want to upskill their staff, or people moving into the industry, even managers who are recognized as an opportunity in this industry, but lacking some of the knowledge or the confidence to move into it before, and that we can help sort of upskill them based on the information that we're being told that the skills people are asking for.
Yeah, so back to that industry, where's the demand, not just for today, but in the years ahead for what really would help a world-class cluster. So the people and the skills being one element, that midfield linkage. The other part really is about that technology enablement and creating that environment. And Sarah, really, I mean, you've had the experience. You've been there, you've done it. You've got, in terms of the way you've developed your Hedgehog Lab sort of business, really. And maybe what do you see as how you leverage that to provide that midfield sort of playmaker in what the opportunity is?
Yeah, I think for us, private sector organizations like ours, particularly in professional services in this sector, have that bridging gap. As you said, you know, that there might be funding from public sector, but ultimately the projects need to be delivered by somebody. And similarly with skills, you know, we do a lot of work with people like Gateshead College, Northumbria University, in really setting the skills agenda, because we will be one of those ideal employers of the future. And with the way technology moves so fast, and a large problem with setting the skills agenda at academia is the way policy and regulation and government works, and even academia to a certain extent historically worked, was by the time you set the skills agenda, the skills that were current 18 months ago become quite outdated. And that's why having that almost agile iterative loop of feedback and involvement from industry is really, really important, and really bringing that industry kind of skills and implementation and projects and bridging that with what the public sector is doing in terms of encouraging an ecosystem and playing a decent citizen's part in that ecosystem is really important, because we're the people effectively transforming some of those visions into practical realities, whether it's the prototypes we saw from CFIT earlier, whether it's the innovation we're looking at in terms of implementing some of the solutions, but also just in terms of continuing that conversation and really starting to think about things that go beyond the basics of fintech, like inclusion, like diversity, etc. We play a big part in that ecosystem.
Yeah, great points. So hopefully you can see this is the, if I may say, the triple helix coming alive of public sector, academia, industry, that's entrepreneur, as well as the major sort of players, really all in sort of practice, really. So that's the overall game plan, but with some tactics that are needed here. And Jenny, I'll come to you. I think the initiative you've got, that you've touched on with the Innovation Accelerator, it was touched on earlier actually by Steve as well. I think probably to see where you think that could go going forward as an opportunity.
Absolutely. We've all got to start somewhere, and it doesn't necessarily have to start with a set of buildings, like I said, with NetPark. With our sort of FinTech digital accelerator, we recognized early doors that it was a sector that we wanted to invest in. And certainly, as a part of the European funding, etc., that model really wouldn't have worked. We had to tap into UK shared prosperity funding and structure a whole new sort of accelerator sort of program in order to just start off that piece of help, I think, that the community needs in order to ignite that cluster. And certainly, starting from small initiatives like that, it's also about looking at other initiatives alongside it and not being afraid to try out new things. Because, we're seeing it as a pilot, and I think Steve would attest that, it's taken us a year, maybe 10 months, to get to the stage where we could, subcontract FinPact to help deliver something like that. We had to be very clear about our vision, what we wanted to achieve. And in some ways, it's actually harder to get something off the ground with public sector money because you have to justify absolutely every penny. And those who've worked in the public sector will know this. And so, there's no room for woolliness. So, yeah, I think it's got to be done with intention.
With intent, obviously, clearly there's a mindset there, and which is the really great thing. And maybe let's just look on the other side of that funding. And Kevin, maybe this is where I'll come to just on that funding opportunity, because maybe what we see, and we've heard the talks earlier about the funding seems to gravitate just to those businesses in the south or London in particular, but there are opportunities emerging.
Definitely. I think that if you think about data for good or smart data, you've got to now think about capital for good. Follow the money.
Yeah.
So where the good money is being deployed, there's going to be innovation, and there's going to be need for tech and data and everything that comes with. But I'm seeing a big shift in the investment community around what Gayla talked about, the intersectional piece. We call that, traditionally it's been vertical by design.
Yeah.
It's now horizontal by design. Yeah. So you're bringing businesses together from multiple sectors around green, finance, energy performance, CO2 reduction, and you've got a business in that itself. And that's really easy to invest into from the seed, scale up, startup, because you're using data at the heart, the smart data. And then when the conditions come in for that consent, the identity, the transparency, and I think that's a nice little intersection into AI.
Yeah.
I think Steve talked about an innovation of something. And I think that if we can build that innovation of something and it's attached to where the capital's being deployed, you've got the investment community looking at that looks very interesting. We can see you're ironing out that valley of despair. It's got a better chance. You've got some multi-discipline skilled people centered around a purpose-driven proposition that I can invest into.
Yeah, it's a great point. And certainly, I mean, your Hedgehog Lab really is across different industries, and therefore you're kind of living that. So what needs to be done to encourage people to think outside their normal vertical boxes? Is it about thinking different, how the technology applies, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think cross-pollination is a real challenge, particularly in financial services. I mean, I've worked in some Garland Forman's financial services for 20 years, and financial services and fintech is very, very siloed in their approach to it. And I think having that diverse perspectives, it was really interesting hearing about open finance. And if you look at the open finance use cases, as Kevin just mentioned, around outside the typical financial services product set, then it becomes really interesting. I mean, we did a piece of work a few years ago working with Northumbrian Water, actually looking at how open banking can help better debt management in the utility sector, actually with partnering with the Visa, one of our attendees today. And so you look at that pollination of, it's not typically a fintech product, it's more a utility product, but you're still trying to solve the debt solution, and bringing those industries, together to do some innovation, I think has been really interesting. And actually, Northumbrian Water runs a great innovation sprint. If people haven't been involved in the fintech community in it, I'd recommend get involved in it, and just really brings that cross-sector expertise into that area.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the Northeast has got a real strong, I don't know if you know, a really strong reputation in London, some of the meetings I'm in, for advanced manufacturing, because of the basis of Nissan, Hitachi, with the development from a distribution logistics point, like sort of the Port of Tyneside, really. And in a way, you think, well, next year when we're here, we'll ask FinTech North to arrange, why aren't Nissan on the stage here? Talk about their innovation, the connectivity to the financial innovation. But Lucy, coming back to the ecosystem down on the ground now, I mean, we talked earlier about how actually you learned about there was much more fintech here than you realised before you actually started to get much more involved in the community. Is that fair? And is that become much more known now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was quite surprised to see that, we always knew that we had some of our partners that had a base in Newcastle, but actually when I moved back here and set up a base for Intercash, started doing a bit of research, and the amount of actual payments businesses, but really large organizations as well, like Sage, WorldPay. We've got one of our issuers based here, one of our processors, and it was just great to see that they were already based here, and that sort of brought about a bit of inspiration to see, well, is there something that we can do in terms of shining more of a light on the ecosystem here? How can we look to work closer together and also enthuse those partners and get involved with some of these projects with the likes of FinPact and collaborations with FinTech North. So we're very much an advocate for what has been currently happening here, and very much keen to find out more about the developments or see how we can contribute to the developments that happen here in a closed circuit fintech environment.
And it's back to, I became very aware that Intercash has this model of actually let's put in before we see what we get out type sort of ecosystem engagement. That's my view. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the whole country, some of the situations we've been in, now we're coming into a new government, and I think it's such a key time to really look at the overall landscape and see what are the fundamental issues here. Is there anything that we can do in sort of proactive planning to put, business case ideas together, then roll that out to local organizations or institutions that are looking to solve problems. And, we're very passionate and driven with that. And part of our core UK strategy is how we build into, bringing more traction and doing more projects in the North. And alongside of that, also working together with FinPact.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lucy. So FinTech becoming this sort of more horizontal sort of play rather, and it really encompassing these other areas of innovation for that really to grow businesses like Intercash and Canny and Cascade and all those other brilliant businesses. People are going to sit at the core, aren't they, Aidan? How are we? What more needs to be done to bring in that so there's an attraction of people think, yeah, that's where I want to be part of?
It's not only sort of bringing in, it's also keeping the talent that we have here. So I see up there, I teach economics as well at A level, and a lot of my students will say, like, once they finish their A levels, they're going to go and get a degree, and they're going to go and find a job, a high-paying job in London. It's like, well, why London? Why do you need to go? Yeah. Why do you need to move away to do that? And it's more what we need is businesses opening up the doors, showing the opportunities that graduates would have in the Northeast, what opportunities there are here, and that's a case of sort of going in for sort of work experience, or sort of we're very keen on the college of bringing in employers and showing them what opportunities there are in the Northeast and speaking to the students. So it's trying to stop this brain drain from the Northeast, and with these boot camps as well, what a great audience we would have for the learners is graduates from the Northeast who've maybe graduated in some sort of finance or some sort of tech, but they want to sort of know a bit more about the industry, coming to us for these boot camps, learning more about the industry, and say this course was designed by the employers of the Northeast, such as Adam or Canny or all these big, great companies that we've got here. And they go, oh, well, these companies are based in the Northeast. And you come in, they're speaking to the students, they're speaking to these adult learners, and then that's sort of keeping the realizing at that point is that they don't need to move away to find these great opportunities that we'll have here.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the key. And I guess that sort of attraction sort of piece. If you've got a community, people think actually I can join one employer, but there will be other employers as time goes on. Is that how people sort of see in their career path going forward?
Yeah, most definitely. Was sort of what we're very keen on, sort of building up their employability skills, but asking them to sort of put career plans together. Where do they see themselves after they sort of finish? Why are they sort of looking to upskill themselves? What are they looking for? And that comes with doing their research, and then once they're doing that, they're finding out what opportunities there are available and what the FinTech landscape looks like in the Northeast. Then they realise there's not just one opportunity; there's plenty of opportunities, and that sort of helps them and helps the business.
It's mutual, isn't it? It's that co-design opportunity. I can't see people really because it's all dark, but if you've got any questions, then please shout out. But I'm going to now go around and actually sort of say, well, if there's, for the team really to really step up even further and score even more goals, if there's one thing that you could ask for from this audience, maybe, for them to think about, they may not have the answer here, one thing, what would it be? Sarah, let's start with you. What would you ask for in order to propel this team to be even more world-class?
I think I'd like to pick up the point that Aidan's made in that it's not just about attracting talent to the region, but it's about retaining talent. I always make a joke, and I don't know how many people know, but Johnny Ive, the famed Apple designer, actually studied at Newcastle Polytechnic, which is now Northumbria University, and he comes and gives some talks, and he said in those days, there was no local jobs to have, so of course, the only option was to go to London or abroad. So I think, to be honest, my ask is exactly what's happening right now. I think with access to funding and skills, it'll allow more entrepreneurs to set up businesses here, which then attracts talent. And my other ask, which I think we're starting to get better at, there's much more collaboration than competition. Historically, I think, even within private sector, within public sector, with the Northeast Command Authority, etc., I think seeing this idea that a rising tide lifts everybody, and I think Aidan's point is brilliant. If we can retain more talent will remain. If there is more ecosystem companies, there's more private sector, there's more public sector. So I think it's just more of everything that we're doing, and to be more collaborative.
Yeah, it's a great point. That you can have that sort of rivalry, but actually, if you can keep the rivalry, but let the collaboration between the North, Newcastle, Sunderland, Darlington, Durham, all combined, then the power of that, again, the tide is going to rise, really. Jenny from Durham, what do you think? What would your ask be?
That's a really hard question because everyone's been so collaborative, and everyone who and every company that I've approached have been really quite positive in being willing to work with us, but also working with that triple helix that you've been talking about, making sure that the strands of private sector, public sector, university knowledge bases are all sort of moving upwards together to launch boats. And, you know, you talk about rising tides, you know, you've got to launch your boats first. Certainly, sometimes when I'm working in this job, I do try to talk, I do enjoy talking to everyone, but there's only one of me. So, you know, although everyone's been really positive, when I'm working on pulling people together for FCA sandbox challenges, hackathons, pulling together, workshops and stuff like that, you know, it's really helpful if you can approach me and you know, see what's going on and see how you can sort of feed into that ecosystem. Because, you know, as I said, you know, there's only one of me. I can only approach so many angles at once. So if you can come flood me with ideas and stuff, you know, I'll try and pick it up and run with it and generate that collaboration.
You can be that facilitator to make sure that connections are happening.
Absolutely. I feel like a matchmaker sometimes, you know. Get the speed dates going and everything, but, you know, I'm lowering the tone now, but, you know, it's about that cross-fertilization.
It's hard-wired, and actually, you know, people and engagement relationships does take time. It's an investment, and sometimes you think, well, I've spent a lot of time on this, has it really paid off? But it will over time. But yeah, great
I appreciate
points.
Everyone's really busy.
Yeah. Kevin, what would your ask be? And I mean, you've been so passionate about this part of the world ever since I've known you, really. And you've seen it, and you've seen the development over recent years working with Steve. But going forward, what's your one ask?
Grow our talent. And I think that with the growing our talent and getting them job ready, skills, people that's been displaced by AI, getting them trained and back into work, and also the problems that we know are coming. But I think talent's built on our personality here in the region. I think our history and the passion and the resilience but we've been underfunded and we haven't had the tools.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see one big thing for talent. I'd like to see a smart data innovation lab that is accessible for free for people to do research into innovation and impact. So it goes back again, you know, what the FCA has done with sandboxes, digital twins, assets that entrepreneurs can come to, government can come to, academia can come to, alongside the entrepreneurs and the corporate entrepreneurs. And I think that in that collaborative environment, you get the tools, because you have to give the talent the tools to be able to then do the things that they want to do, build a business, or make an impact on purpose. But I think that's the investments I would like to see into talent, and give our next generations a better chance in life.
Yeah, so that innovation lab that Steve mentioned, which is coming, which we can't talk about just yet because there's still some working through, could be that magnet really going forward. And I do know people from the Northeast, there's a cultural element here, isn't there? And I'm thinking back to some of the things you were saying, Lucy, really. I know my daughter, who sort of came here to university, said, Dad, this is my home now. This is where I live. It's not Edinburgh, it's not Reading, it's here. And she's staying here. And I think that says something that not many places to do. So it's how you capture that. And Lucy, is that fair? Is there a cultural element that can be utilised by entrepreneurial businesses such as yourself?
Yeah, I think there's always been a very strong, known cultural element from Newcastle, and I think it's just really amazing at all the developments that are happening here now. And I think that, given some time and a lot of effort from the people involved, it is going to make a difference locally. And I think as much as, the talent can come from the universities who are, have thriving young students who are very keen to get involved in FinTech, that we could also look at, other people who are based here who maybe didn't do so well in university, and how can sort of skills be crossed over into the business. So myself, for example, I come from a long hospitality background, and I was able to utilize some communication skills that I had, and push forward with that into a career out of FinTech. So but I personally think that something that I would like to see is stronger communication coming from the northeast, communicating down to the south, and seeing more of those local businesses who are based in the northeast getting involved in the projects that are happening. And even if they're not able to put much time towards it, just showing their support in, keeping in touch and sharing information and supporting in that communication as well.
So is that fair? Is it fair that your ask really is how do we make this magnet of the Northeast and the Northeast FinTech cluster more visible? How do we actually get it more known out there?
Yes, absolutely. And I think once we can crack that as an industry working out of Newcastle, that'll funnel through to the rest of the community that might not know what FinTech is, for example, then that then funnels through to the businesses and more entrepreneurs that are working in different areas.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Go on, Jenny.
Sorry, I'm going to have a second stab at this.
Yeah.
Following on from Lucy's point as well, which is very well made. I mean, we have a lot of talent up here in the Northeast. And proving the point about the communications and getting the collaborations in, it's about showing that we have the opportunities to match up with the talents that we have to retain that talent up here in the Northeast. So shouting out about the opportunities that each and every one of these organizations have and individuals have, I think makes it a good place. I mean, it's never been easier to communicate these things. Now, you've got all these social media things, and information is quick nowadays. You can share that.
Yeah, spot on, Jenny. I would say, if you don't mind, if I say as an outsider, actually, this Northeast is a culture that's fairly humble. There's a lot of humility, which is, I think, is an important sort of strength. But actually, the other side of that is you're not actually blowing the trumpet enough about all the brilliant people, the brilliant businesses, the brilliant collaborations that are going on. And there's something really to think of. Go on, Kevin, do you want to come now?
There's 3 pupils from St Mary's School up in Newcastle here today. And they're here because they're inspired again to FinTech. They actually contacted us to come here for the day.
Lovely.
Now, if their job is to go back and tell all their friends and their family just what a great day they've had. Have you had a good day? Yeah.
Had a great lunch.
Yeah. And you met loads of good people, yeah? Good. So tell the story, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's the story, really. Aidan, you've got a very specific ask, which I think is really, really important about.
Yeah, I alluded to it before. Obviously, we're wanting sort of the information. We're wanting to fill in the gaps, the skills gaps. But we can only do that if you're telling us. So we'll be in the networking area later on, next to our big sign that says Gateshead College, and it's hard to miss us. Come and talk to us. We're wanting to know. What I would hate to say is, in a few years, when people are coming knocking on your doors looking for jobs, and you're saying, I wish they just had a bit more knowledge of this, or they've got a bit of a gap here, they're really good on the financial side, but they're missing a bit more of the tech side, or vice versa, whatever it may be. It's only the pool of talent is only going to be as good as what we are putting into it. So if you can tell us what is needed, we've got rein to sort of create a curriculum around that and sort of help upskill this future talent. So that's my ask. So please come and speak to us, collab with us, talk to us, and hopefully that you'll reap the benefits in the years to come.
Yeah, great. I've seen these sort of boot camps, co-design between employers. Here's our future demand. Here's then that you don't know what you don't know. By working with a college and co-designing, actually you learn things together about the type of skills, how they evolve over time.
Yeah, most definitely. And what's great about these sort of the boot camps is that it's not sort of, we're launching ours from November, but they're an ever dynamic thing. Once the curriculum's created, it's not stuck like that. If we run it and then we're getting feedback that's or tweak this or include this, or maybe that's not as relevant as what it used to be, it changes. And it's an ever changing thing, and so that it's hopefully it's a great tool that the Department of Education and the local authority have put in place to help bring great talent through into the industry.
Absolutely. Right, we're coming to the close, unless there's any questions. So if I was going to ask them one more question. Is that you? At the back, yes. Thank you.
If you can just introduce yourself as well before you
Richard, work in open finance. How do you stop institutions and fintechs choosing to develop their products in India and Eastern Europe and bring that over here instead?
Great question. Now, who would like to start? Sarah?
Considering that's most of the conversations I've had over the last 12 months, I think that's a good place to start. Look, I think the reality is, without talking about globalization, etc., financial service organizations, particularly in the last 12, 15 months, have had cost pressures. And the reality is, as long as the quality bar is set at a certain extent, they will increasingly go nearshore and offshore. In fact, I was speaking to a couple of other consultancies about what that impact has had on the professional services market. I think the answer is quite easy. Part of it is skills. I think the supply-demand curve has to be reasonable in terms of having those skills. But I know, speaking to some of the consultancies, we do have the skills, but ultimately private sector will make a decision that is beneficial for their business in terms of, wherever the cheapest resource will come from. I think where in the skills bit, where I think we can really excel is building. We talked about advanced manufacturing is a great example. Advanced computing and technology skills, I think, are really important for the skills agenda. It goes to Gateshead College's perspective. A lot of the stuff on data science and AI, etc., is not easily, offshoreable, especially if you think about regulation, compliance, GDPR, all of these things. So building a skill space that is actually more suited to what customers will buy in the region and invest in the regions, I think there is a job for the academia to do that. There is a job for public policy to do that, and there is a job for private sector to obviously invest in those skills.
Yeah, Kevin, do you want to add?
The helix, right? I think that I'm working on a project at the moment that's about inward investment, significant investment coming in the Northeast for talent, and talent to support their region and their investment into our region. If we get that right, then that is a defensible position. I think that back to the regulations in particular, we heard a lot about the open banking and the regs. We've got to stay ahead of that. I think we've lost the pace with open banking, even though we're 11, 12 million people. Singapore, Australia, Brazil are laying down that smart data regulations as we speak. Australia's had it for many years under the ACC, which is the equivalent to our Competitions and Markets Authority. They went straight to smart data, open X or open life, whatever you want to call it. And I think so we've got to get our things that we are really smart at and lay it down. That becomes a defensible position as well. But there's always a place for follow the sun in terms of technology and data as well to collaborate. And I think that, for the eastern side to support here and follow the sun around in terms of development 24/7, I think there's opportunities in clever models like that. It's not always about the price, right? It's about being able to stand up good business that is trusted, it's authentic, it's following those regulations and more. I think we've been slow with AI. I think that the EU Act that's come in has caught us off the hop. I think that they've put 3 things in place. They've started to say, collaborate, form clusters, do your innovation piece, then we'll put you on the fastest compute for your AI globally, arguably, as that comes in place. And we will invest into your business under the AI. So they're going to accelerate AI, data, smart data, quicker than we will. Yeah. But we've got an opportunity. We've got the new government in place. We've got the devolution. Yeah. We've got the imp. So this region's got massive momentum. I've never seen it before, Stephen, when you...
No, I agree. I think there's such a... And actually, there's 2 points really you touched on, both Sarah and yourself. There's a distinctiveness that you've got here in the Northeast. And you should really recognise the value of that and how to bottle it and how to channel it. The other thing from my experience working with clusters is it's not... The answer to your question is not an either or. We've got Indian businesses who've got the resources in India looking to move into the UK because they see the distinctiveness that we've got in Edinburgh or Bristol or even Newcastle. So it works both ways. It's not a choice of one or the other. And I think your own particular business, Intercash, is a good example of that. It's not putting everything in one geographical location.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we still do a lot of our implementation operations out of Canada, but I think just to answer the gentleman's question there, one way that I could see it work in terms of how could we expand our operations here is from, first of all, the collaborations that we do with the organisations that are really looking to make change, but also understand where the gaps are in the market locally and see what innovations, entrepreneurs, plans are. And, we offer things like MVP style solutions where you don't need to put huge investment to get a card program off the ground running. And then from there, launching an MVP, testing it to market and seeing how you can further enhance it and accelerate it would then draw more traction from an international business like Intercash to then bring more staff on board. But it is also something that we're interested to do anyway. But I just think having more local developments, innovations that are really taking off, really solving a solution, making change, would definitely bring a much stronger intent from an international business like ours, for example.
And I think that's a terrific goal to finish off with, because we've played our full 45 minutes. I think there's been some great goals. What a fantastic sort of team, if I may sort of say. Wonderful contributions. Aidan, Jenny, Lucy, Sarah, Kevin, sort of thank you. Full-time whistler's gone, but we'll be in the changing room later if you want a little chat. See you later.
I think that's a 10 out of 10 performance from our team there. Thank you so much to Stephen for chairing that panel so fantastically. And what a ringing endorsement for the region as well. So really inspiring stuff. So our next segment is involving Jess and Ollie at Scott Logic. If you guys can make your way up to the stage, that would be awesome. Scott Logic have been a great supporter and active participant in some of our events in our community recently. Came with us to Money 2020 last month. David joined us as part of that trade mission. So yeah, come and talk to us all about how FinTech can help support critical infrastructure. Please, Ollie. Thank you. Nice one. And that's your slide. Thanks so much.
Hey everyone, I'm just Giles. I'm not Jess. I'll explain that in a minute. I'm having a great day listening to all these talks. I hope you are too. Also having a great day making connections. I did make a connection earlier with Stephen, sadly just based on the fact that we're both wearing the same shirt. Not sure what the odds of that are. We both have the same poor taste in shirts. Also managed to make a very brief connection with Sophie, who politely laughed at the same shirt fiasco. And then, as we sort of talked about our ageing wardrobe, politely reframe that as champions of sustainable fashion. So, well done us. Cool. I'm going to do, I can't wander around. I'm going to have to talk here. I'm going to do, or give you a little bit of insight that we've got in Scott Logic in delivering FinTech in the public sector. My name is Giles Buist. I'm a delivery principal with Scott Logic. I was going to be here presenting today with my colleague Jess McEvoy, who is a technical product expert in Scott Logic, but can't be with us, unfortunately. Between us and within Scott Logic, we've got significant experience delivering projects, software within financial services and within the public sector. So what we wanted to do was share some of our experiences of doing that. In particular, we wanted to talk about, we thought what would be helpful to share with you is some of the insights we've got into the different priorities and emphasis that might be placed on public sector work compared to financial services work. First, I do want to introduce Scott Logic for anyone who's not already familiar with us. We are a UK-based tech consultancy. We are headquartered in Newcastle. That's our main workforce. Of the 500 people, there's about 200 of us in Newcastle. We have offices throughout the UK. We are architects, software architects, business architects, we're business analysts, we're software engineers, we are user experience designers, we are delivery folk like myself. And we deliver projects for clients in a number of different areas. Predominantly, we do custom-built software development, but we also help out with sort of product roadmaps. We support, advise on things like the adoption of AI and machine learning and getting the use and benefits out of those, and get involved in things like how to best exploit an organization's data and projects around that. We have a long history of financial services, so over 20 years of working with various different clients, investment banks, retail banks, building societies, and FinTechs. That's a lot about who we are, or what we do rather. So this is more about who we are. We're a company that has a commitment to the sustainability and environmental impact we have on our community. So we're certified B Corp. So I'm getting to the lessons learned, I promise. What I wanted to do next 2 slides is just set a bit of context. So we have worked with a lot of government departments, DDP, HMLR, DLUC, or Ministry of Housing, local communities, local government, whatever that is nowadays. The projects that I wanted to use as examples here in delivering FinTech and FinTech-esque products within government are 2 projects that we did with the Scottish Government. So for the Scottish Government, for over a few years, and now delivered into live running and with users, we've worked on Scot Payments and Scot Account. Scot Payments is a core service for the Scottish Government for use by other Scottish Government departments, various different Scottish Government departments, to make payments to citizens and to other departments. And Scot Account is a digital identity service. It's again, it's a core service for use by other Scottish Government departments to manage the users on their service and to get those users, or give those users, a way of verifying their identity and having a very, I say users, should talk about citizens, and for citizens to have control over how they might share various verified attributes with other Scottish Government departments. So that's a little bit of context, tiny bit more, framed in the form of a fun fact. Did you know that the Chancellor of the Exchequer is the only person allowed to drink alcohol in the House of Commons? And they can only do this when they're giving his or her budget speech. Odd, not many chancellors take advantage of this rare opportunity, as you might imagine, but they are the only ones allowed to. The point here is that government and working within government organisations, public sector organisations, they have a long legacy, a long history. They're not a new company. And they have rules and regulations and governance processes that you need to work to. So when I talk about some of the 4 lessons in a minute, it's in the context of the things that government emphasise, working with government need to emphasise and prioritise, but it's in the context of working in sometimes a fairly complex environment with rules, regulations, and governance. All right, on to the first of the 4 lessons learned. So this one's around delivering to policy intent. It's important when working with government to understand that most projects are starting off because of some government policy that's been announced, and you'll try to help the government department deliver that policy intent. Not necessarily being presented with a one solution will do everything we need, and it is a piece of software that you've got to develop. So you get to, quite excitingly, work with government departments to define the solutions that will help deliver the policy intent. And then importantly, as you go through delivering those in a lovely iterative, agile manner, you keep revisiting whether you are doing enough to meet the policy intent, whether you've got enough strands to the service that you're delivering to meet the policy intent. An example from the Scott Accounts, Scott Payments work that we did was when we set off to deliver this policy, the main thing was to deliver a set of core services that would be more efficient, lower management overhead for Scottish Government, and it could be used across their government departments. So we really had to think about how the service would meet multiple government departments' needs and not go down just one core service, but look at a couple of different services and combinations of services that could be delivered. So delivering policy to policy intent is one thing. Number two, usability, inclusivity and accessibility. So really important. Users don't typically have much option when they're interacting with the public sector, with government services. They have to interact with them. It's important that we make them as usable, inclusive and accessible as possible. Usability, on that for both of these services, considerable effort was invested into doing user research, user testing, and collecting user behavior analytics and refining the services. Example there, the Scott Account service that I mentioned has a place where users can store verified attributes and then choose to share them with other government departments. Initially, it was called MySafe. Seemed to communicate the point. It was theirs, they owned it. It was a safe space to store the data. However, turns out when users were being redirected from one Scottish Government service to Scott Account and then redirected to, or what seemed to them to be redirected to another thing called MySafe, that third level of redirection was starting to get them a little bit worried, confused. They were hesitating around that part of the application and asking more questions about it, seeking more support. Just renaming that part of the service, in fact moving that sort of third level of name from the service, made a big difference to how users interacted with the service and kept more users able to complete the core journey. Inclusivity, so we need to make sure the service can support multiple different use cases. Use a Scott Account example again, and then we'll do a payments example in a second. Scott Account, a lot of people in the core user journey will use their passport or driver's license to verify their identity, but not everyone has one. And there are other identity documents, credible identity documents, or credible ways of verifying someone's identity. It requires effort, and it is for a smaller subset of users that you're delivering those things for, but it's important you do it. The more users you include, the more you can spread the investment in what will ultimately be some, not 100% digital journeys. We need to make sure all users are included for government, and some users will not be able to complete a digital journey. They will need a completely self-supported journey. They will need some additional support. And the more you include each set of users on the digital journeys, the more funding you have to spread across and give a good service to those people that can't engage with the digital part of the service completely. Accessibility, I'm sure you know what that is, but yeah, effectively things like doing accessibility testing, say how well does this service support people with accessibility needs, how can we make sure they can use the service, and that on Scott Payments, for example, modern development frameworks can give you a lot of support for things like screen readers out of the box. However, if you actually use it, it can be really confusing. It can jump all over your service, and it can read out to some of your users with accessibility needs huge reams of information that most users will skip past when they're using your service. So thinking about how you actually make it usable for those people rather than just supportive of the tools is important. So that was lesson number 2. Usability, inclusivity and accessibility, important when delivering services for the public sector. Number 3, data ownership. Citizens own their data, and we need to ask for their consent to do things with their data. I know consent with data has already been mentioned today, but for the public sector, it's particularly important. We make sure users know what it is we're going to do with their data, and we ask for their consent to do it. So on these services, we ask for things like consent to engage a third party to verify someone's identity, consent to store users' data, and made sure ultimately the user journey works even if they don't want to consent to that data being stored. and consent to share their data with other departments. We think it's useful for the user and the departments to be able to share that data. It decreases the number of different interactions the user, the citizen, needs to have with government, and that's good, right? Who wants to be phoning every government department you interact with and giving them the same information all the time? But we make sure that it's the users who have the option and the opportunity to consent to that. We don't assume consent. So users own their data, and we get consent to use it and to do the things we want to do with it. Okay, moving on to number 4, and the last one. Operability, maintainability, and potentially reusability. So here, what we were thinking about was, in government, it's quite common, having helped a public department, a government department, deliver a service, that they will want to run it, maintain it, own it going forward. And one of the things we need to make sure is it's possible for them to do that. So making sure the service is operable, making sure they can do all the things that they need to do with it. Things like, with these 2 projects we delivered, think about how easy it was for them to suspend and re-enable an account on the service, where they need to, where they might be investigating, say, potential fraud or some other issue. Things like saying, how important to this part of the service is it that it can be updated, maintained in a sort of zero downtime fashion, and then building the service according to that need. So operability was important. Maintainability, making it as easy to maintain as possible, reduce the number of packages and things that are involved in the service. That's a bit technical, and actually it's an area that, frankly, we're still working on. We can always make improvements. And then finally, reusability. A public service, a public sector service you've delivered, has involved public money being spent on it. And if there's an easy opportunity for government to reuse that service or some component of that service across other government departments, then that's better use of public money. So we think about the reusability. So that is me wrapping up, almost on time. So I say, hope that was useful to you. 4 lessons learned in delivering FinTech and FinTech-esque products within the public sector. Thank you.
Expertly timed there, Giles, and apologies there for getting you mixed up with your colleague. But yeah, fascinating presentation. Thank you so much. And continuing Scott Logic's involvement, I'd like to ask Karen and Oliver to join me up on our virtual living room, I think we've got here at the front of the room. So yeah, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Karen, actually more formally to the event. Karen and Google Cloud sponsored our get-together last night, brought all of our speakers and sponsors together. So yeah, fantastic ecosystem enablers, and really looking forward to hearing more about the work that you're doing. So come and sit down and take it away, guys. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here. The energy and sort of insight in this sector is just energizing, right? To feed off the room. The insights we've already heard today have been fantastic, and I think we were planning on talking about a bunch of sort of scaling sort of challenges and things, but I think we'll probably recap and build on some of the things that have been talked about already. So I'm Oliver Cronk. I'm the technology director of Scott Logic. It's great to be doing an event in our home HQ town. I do talks all over the place, and it's great to actually be in Newcastle talking on behalf of Scott Logic. And I lead in a lot of our R&D. I've got a diverse experience across financial services and energy and public sector. I've also worked in a 9-person startup all the way through to a 300,000 strong organization. So I've seen organizations, working organizations, and 4 organizations of different sizes. So it gives me a bit of perspective on the scaling challenges. But that's me. Karen, do you want to give a quick intro to your Google Cloud?
Yeah. Thanks, Oliver, and thank you for the FinTech North team for having myself and the Google Cloud FinTech team here. We're really grateful to be supporting and partnering with the FinTech North and East ecosystem. So a bit about myself. I've been at Google for about 8 years, and you can probably hear from the accent, not originally from the UK. I moved over from Australia and have been part of the FinTech team for the last 1.5 years. And so we've really been in the ecosystem enabling the startups and scale-ups that are growing across the UK. And that's kind of one of the hats that I wear. The other hat is also looking after VC partnerships, so looking after the alliances that we have with the VCs, the accelerators, the incubators across the UK that are helping to provide funding, connections, and global partnership support for those fintechs that are growing. So excited to be sharing some of the ways that we're working with the fintechs across the UK right now.
So let's kick off then with some of those sort of insights about sort of scaling. I mean, a number of things resonated with the talks we've heard earlier today, particularly around sort of talent and needing to kind of think differently and operate differently, particularly with sort of when it comes to risk and kind of scale as you grow. But Karen, I guess what sort of things would you like to sort of build on with your experience from working with startups and VCs?
I think there's been a lot that's been shared today across the board, and I might just touch on the first thing. I think it was Phil from the FinTech Growth Fund that was mentioning about capital and the difficulty that a lot of fintechs are facing at the moment in terms of raising for capital. And what I'm seeing at the moment is that there is a lot of dry powder out there. So there is investment funds and there is liquidity for funding to go through to fintechs, but the needle has really moved now in terms of how fintechs are being funded. So historically, UK has been heavily invested, both the UK and the US, but what we're seeing now is that it's not enough to just simply have a business idea and to put something forward and to have a investment based on a multiplier of your revenue. So they're really looking now at timelines to revenue, timelines to actually breaking even to profit. And so when thinking about your investment regime and how you're actually raising as well, what are the ways that you can really build a bit of, I guess, robustness in your business case? And so what we've seen is we're helping actually a lot of fintechs out there in their raising journey. So be that helping them with the accelerators, incubators, or actually getting out to investors, be that angels and others. So building up that business case as first and foremost. We're also seeing that resiliency in terms of data resiliency, infrastructure resiliency, and scalability is a huge focus. And so a lot of UK fintechs are looking to expand out of just the UK. So they might be operating across the EU, the US, and so looking at their data architecture and their infrastructure and how they're actually going into those other regions is super important. So I'm not sure if it was maybe raised, but for example, infrastructure resiliency, we've had a lot of new regions open up. So there's been a lot of investment over in KSA, in the Saudi region, also in South Africa as well. So actually, as of this year, we just opened up a data region in South Africa, and end of last year, we opened up a region in Dammam in KSA. So because we're following the trends of what our startups and scale-ups are viewing as blockers for their growth journeys, we're seeing, again, just having operations, having ability to have the infrastructure hosted and have that managed by a vendor and a partner that can actually take on that load as being a huge enabler for the organizations that we're partnering with. So again, we're just kind of seeing where are the challenges, the pain points around fintechs and their growth journeys, and we're trying to be the enablers of that. So from an infrastructure level, definitely when it comes to, again, just elastic compute, having managed databases, having all of that ready to go so that you can alleviate your technical teams to focus on building the products that you're serving to your customers. That's a huge area that we've seen a lot of benefit.
Thanks, Karen. I guess building on that sort of resilience and sort of underlying infrastructure that helps sort of fintechs, particularly when it comes sort of when they become relevant to the regulator. I mean, one of the things that stood out for me recently is, I don't know if anyone saw this, but Monzo talking about their stand-in kind of approach, that rather than having sort of a backup system that they don't necessarily know whether it's going to work reliably, they actually effectively test in live their kind of failover system. They put a small percentage of their customers through the sort of stand-in platform, which is sort of a fascinating new architectural model. But I guess sort of looking at things like DORA and kind of other regulations, what are the things you're doing to help customers in that space?
Yeah, Oliver, a great point as well about Monzo, and I might just go back on that a little bit. So 2 months ago, we actually held our FinTech Forum, which is our annual event where we bring together our FinTech ecosystem. It is down in London, over at our head office in King's Cross, and I actually had the great pleasure of facilitating a panel with Matteo Farfa, the CTO of Monzo, and what he shared was their decision of actually basing themselves and having a lot of the infrastructure hosted on Google Cloud. One of the primary reasons was around security, scalability, and resiliency. And as they're moving across and expanding into the US, so they've got about just over 10 million customers now. They had 4 million back in 2021, and they've grown by 3 million in just the last year. So scalability and having again, infrastructure that is resilient to that level of growth, and also being able to expand to other regions was a huge focus for them. And so again, on that piece, as a massive scale up in FinTech unicorn, really, those are the things that these organizations are considering. And so that's an area that we're really able to help. on the regulation piece, so you mentioned DORA, the Digital Operational Resiliency Act that's come through. So if you're a fintech financial services organization that is operating in the EU or even the UK, I know there's no mandate right now for UK organizations, but I can imagine that the FCA and the regulators are looking at that quite closely and looking to put that through at some point. So I'm already working with organizations now here in the UK where they're proactively looking to meet these mandates around DORA. And so a big piece of that is looking at their cybersecurity posture. And so what we're seeing now is that it is actually necessary, even if as a fintech you have your core cloud, so you've got your infrastructure, you've got your kind of core production environment, you need to have a secondary cloud for failover, for disaster recovery, for backup. And that's super important that they actually have this setup and this networking in place. So we're actually going in there now and doing proof of concepts, looking at what's your current architecture, how can we make that more fault tolerant and resilient, and make sure that you're meeting these mandates like DORA that's coming through.
I was going to, I guess, build on that. The concentration risk concern that the regulator has as well is the other reason why multi-cloud is attractive. But switching gears a little bit, and one of the topics that I've been really excited, quite frankly, to hear talked about quite a lot today is the ESG considerations and everything from sort of climate exposures in portfolios through to sort of climate financing and so on and so forth. One of the things I spend a lot of time on, I have a small team dedicated to in terms of research and development, is the impact that technology has on the environment. It's something that gets glossed over a lot, and it's kind of somewhat hidden from many of us. But one of the fascinating things that we've done in our research is, as financial services firms, it's somewhere between 35 and 45% of the emissions actually comes from technology, running the technology, and so on and so forth. So, I think startups, the fintech startups, are in a really unique place to kind of build from the start using cloud in a more considerate way. And I guess if there's one bit of advice I'd give startups right now is, if you are building on cloud, just check what the carbon emissions are of the cloud region you've chosen. Because actually one of the easiest, quickest things you can do is change the cloud region of your hosting, and that can have a huge impact on the kind of carbon emissions. But beyond kind of thinking about the kind of the region that the hosting, what other things is Google kind of doing to support organizations with their sustainability goals, Karen?
It's a huge focus for us. And I think from the ethos of really from where we started, and our DNA and our focus has always been thinking about the user. And we've got a huge focus around sustainability, where since 2007, we've operated as a carbon neutral cloud. So we were the first cloud provider to actually be able to say that in the space. And we have a target right now to be carbon net zero by 2030. So that's something that we're actively working towards. And even recently, we announced an investment in a new data region that's being built in Herefordshire. I know that
Herefordshire, I think it's.
Herefordshire. I know my pronunciation isn't the best, but again, with that focus of being able to actually track and monitor what your emissions are is a huge focus. So if you go within the Google Cloud Console, there's actually a toggle bar that you can go and you can select a region, a zone, and actually see what the emission or what the footprint would be for operating and spinning up your workloads in that region in real time. And at the moment, we're actually the only cloud provider that's able to provide that. So a huge focus has been, and we've talked about this, and I've heard a lot of people speaking about reporting and how to accurately report on your emissions. Because you can have a target, but if the data isn't being shown real time for you to feed that back, that's a huge problem, right? So that's an area that we're trying to help with our organizations to allow them with those real-time insights and that data to report on their sustainability goals. But then us ourselves, we're actively looking at how we can, again, operate in a way that we're able to operate sustainably within our own remit.
So Karen, we've got about 4 or so minutes left, and I'm keen for us to sort of finish on how we're collectively sort of supporting fintechs, particularly scaling and around kind of go-to-market. And tell us a little bit, I guess, to start with, about the Google Startups program, because that's pretty big, the thing that you offer, right?
Yeah, that's a great starting point. So if you're a startup that's Series or Seed, Series A, raising at the moment, there is a program that we have globally available called the Google Startups program. Yes, it does allow you to up to 350,000 of credits, especially if you're an AI-first, AI-founded startup. But beyond that, the main thing that we can provide is engineering support. So a lot of that is looking at, what's your current product roadmap, what's your architecture, actually getting our engineers in to go through your product and actually help from a technical standpoint. That could be running things like hackathons. So actually a few weeks ago, one of my colleagues who's here, she actually went up to Durham and ran a hackathon with the Adam Bank team. And they were able to ideate with GenAI, with some of the new tooling that we've come out, on some use cases that the team was thinking about developing and deploying. So there's a lot of things that we can provide from a strategic partnership perspective that, again, there's the pool of credits that the program provides, but it's also thinking about along the lines of if you're looking to expand to a new region, get into new markets, how to actually get even brokered an introduction to an account that someone in the team might be working with in another region. That's a huge area that we're seeing us being able to differentiate the relationship and the resources that we're able to bring to fintechs that are scaling up. So it's, it's part of the Google Starts program, but a lot of times people just see we've got the credits, but then how to actually utilize them in a meaningful way is super important.
And I'm glad you touched on AI, because I think there's a lot of pressure, I think, for startups to be demonstrating where they're using AI and how can they be leveraging AI. And I feel that that's driving perhaps people to look at AI perhaps sometimes through the wrong lenses. And we spend quite a lot of time kind of trying to de-hype and kind of get to the real value where AI can help, and particularly where AI and the right data architectures can kind of help. So that's certainly something we're helping financial services firms of all sizes kind of with. But there's some interesting stuff that Google have been doing with like AML and things as well, right? With the AI side.
Yeah, there's definitely a few use cases. So actively working on things with fintechs, but also within the financial services space. And so actually late last year, we announced a partnership with HSBC where we built out a anti-money laundering API essentially, and that was able to trace and find risk by 4 times, like to actually increase the risk, awareness for HSBC in their processes. And they were able to prove out and find false positives and increase that percentage by 60%. So that was something that we built out with a large tier 1 bank. But then from there, what we've been able to do is actually box that up and actually go, you know what, we can actually provide this service to other fintechs, financial services that are looking to build out in this space. So fraud detection, I know right now APP fraud is a huge issue in the market. And so what I'm seeing a lot of fintechs is they don't have the ability to necessarily build out their own service in-house. So it's thinking of what to build versus what to buy. And at the moment, we do have very niche and specific financial services, APIs, tooling that can actually help you scale the operation. Things like document processing at scale, regulatory reporting. So even just flagging, hey, there's this new regulation that's come up. Have you thought about this? And making sure that your customers are aware of these updates. So there's, again, a lot of out-of-the-box solutions that we're able to bring out. And that's just on the things that we're developing and deploying ourselves. In terms of working with startups and organizations, fintechs, what I've seen is there's been a big move in B2C, shifting to B2B. And so a lot of, say, payments providers that have done extremely well in their own right, what they're doing now is actually shifting their services and going, hey, you know what, we've built out something really successful. Let's box this up and bring this to larger tier 1, tier 2 organizations as a B2B service, banking as a service. And so we've been helping a lot of these organizations onboard onto the marketplace with their go-to-market. And a lot of, again, the use cases that they're deploying are building on Gemini. We've just launched Gemini Flash 1.5 as well. That was recently released. So there's a lot of use cases and solutions that we're building out. It's quite an exciting space. But again, it's just how do you keep on top of all of this technology and all these announcements? So constantly, we're working with our engineering teams actively with these customers, ideating, brainstorming, and hacking away together. We've actually got a huge hackathon Friday, over at the Excel Center in London. So there's just lots happening in the space.
Yeah, keeping up is a challenge, right? So look, I think we're out of time. I guess we'll take questions perhaps in one of the networking sort of sessions later. But Karen, it's been great to sort of share the stage with you and talk about the sort of insights that you've gained from the work you've been doing. So thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.